Good morning, AP historians. So today what we're going to learn about, we've learned a lot about different reform movements. We're going to focus specifically on issues facing women in the 1830s. So some of the things to keep in mind is the laws on the books and the kind of common practices of the time period that limit opportunities for women. So one is just very simply kind of, it's not like a law, right? However, just kind of common practice that uh, it's much more kind of socially acceptable for men to kind of share their political beliefs, share their views on social issues, and they're less likely wanting to hear from women. Okay, um, part of that has to do with the idea that, okay, well, only men are voting, that is the public sphere, and so women's sphere at this time is more of the domestic role, okay, the household. Now, up until 1837, you're not going to have any colleges, universities that are accepting women into, their institution. So part of the reason why, right, is okay, this splitting up of gender roles, right? That, okay, if they're viewing the roles of women as primarily in the domestic sphere, you don't necessarily need a formalized education to do that. Okay, that's more for, the public sphere of work, needing opportunities to kind of work up in the system, right, to get a higher paying job, which isn't really necessarily in traditional gendered roles viewed as something that women are doing, right? And so, no, these two things are kind of intertwined, right? It's like, okay, we're not allowing them access to education. And then men are saying, okay, I don't want to hear your opinion because you're not educated on these issues. Now, eventually, with these reforms, you'll see that, okay, like you're going to then start to see the formation of women's colleges. Now, up to this point, women are not able to vote in any state of the union, so they can't necessarily pass laws or influence laws, or politicians for that matter, to change these types of practices. Now, you will see some women working. Okay, we're starting to see that change with the market revolution, where it's still quote unquote women's work of making clothes, but it's now happening in a factory. Okay. Another kind of common occupation at the time is with the educational reforms of and the creation of public schools, is women then working as teachers. Okay? Teaching still to this day is a very heavily feminized profession. Okay, and part of it stems from those traditional gender roles, right? We talked about Republican motherhood, this idea that women are more moral and supposed to kind of raise good voters, good citizens. Okay, now even though they're going to be in the workforce, they're going to be paid substantially less than their male counterparts. Okay, so see a lot of these tie-ins with modern day as well. Okay, um, so looking at kind of modern day connections, women are more educated modern day than men are. Okay, I'm talking modern day, like present day. Women are graduating from college at higher rates. Okay, however, when they get in the workforce, you'll still see a substantial pay gap between men and women. Now, of course, women can vote. However, we're seeing women represented in politics substantially less than men. Another interesting one here is that pretty much until 1839, women are not allowed to own property. Okay, all of the property and materials that they have are controlled and owned by some kind of like eldest male, right? So if it was an unmarried woman, it would be her father, right, or closest eldest male relative. Okay? Then when she's married, pretty much all of, if she was to earn wages or anything of that sort, all of her property is owned by her husband. Now, along with that, she is not legally, she does not have the right to sign any sort of contract. So if she wanted to start a business, okay, own a home, okay, do any of those types of things that are expanding her economic opportunity, she's not able to do so without a cosigner that has to be male. So you're going to see, like, okay, and as I've mentioned here, that we're going to see a lot of kind of parallels here with enslaved people, that all of her possessions belong to someone else. She does not hold legal title to property. Her possessions are owned by someone else. Now, another component, similar to enslavement, is it is legal for the husband to assault his wife. Now, with all of this, it's not necessarily, I guess it's kind of different practices as far as how the law worked back then. Okay, the law was meant to kind of govern interactions in the public sphere between people. Okay, violence, abuse, those types of things that happened within the home was viewed as something that was not kind of the role of the government at that time, at least to my knowledge. Okay, so you're going to have then these abusive relationships. We've talked about then the temperance movement, which is dealing with alcoholism. And so this is why you're going to start to see reformers at the time trying to kind of link all these things together here of temperance, Second Great Awakening, of moral reforms, the women's rights movement, which we'll take a closer look at here. Now, if we're looking at this from the perspective of women, right, they cannot earn a wage, they cannot own property, they might be in an abusive relationship. Now, the other part is, if they wanted to get a divorce, they do not have custody of the children. So there's always this fear that if they were to leave their husband, they'd lose the kids, they have no money, they have no legal title to start their own business, sign a contract, okay? And so this makes them essentially dependent upon men for everything. Now, even all those circumstances combined together, if a woman was to decide to get a divorce, okay, it is extremely difficult to do so. So, for example, you have to look at different state laws. However, in New York, adultery, essentially cheating on your spouse, was the only grounds for divorce. Now, the problem is that's very difficult to prove in the court of law, right? If you have the wife saying he has a relationship outside of marriage, the husband says no, most likely the courts are going to side with the husband in this case. And then with that, there's that fear of losing children because of traditional gender roles, men are the ones that are making money, right? That are the wage earners that can support the children. So the wife most likely is going to lose custody of those kids. Right. Now, there is kind of this idea of alimony where, because the wife has stayed at home, take care of the children, that she essentially has no wealth. So there are alimony payments that are paid to the wife for essentially a time where she's able to kind of get a job and get on her feet. However, there's no real enforcement of this to make sure that women receive payment and are able to kind of, recover and start their life essentially from nothing. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do is, in your notes, you're going to see a lot of women's rights reformers that are also abolitionists. Okay? And part of the reason why is because they see similar situations in the way that they're treated and the inequalities of women. And they say, these are similar to slavery. So what I'm going to ask you to do is jot some down in your notes. Kind of think about what specific rights, what specific opportunities are being denied that we see kind of similarities. Obviously, they're not the same, but how can we kind of compare these issues? Now, what we're going to do in class is we're going to hold a Seneca Falls Convention. So what's going to happen is you see Elizabeth Cady Stanton here, who is going to organize a mass women's rights movement in Seneca Falls, New York. Okay. Notice here you also have Frederick Douglass, again, kind of this tying in of shared movements. And so they're going to write their Declaration of Sentiments. Now, the Declaration of Sentiments is essentially modeled after the Declaration of Independence, where they are saying women now have been abused and mistreated by men. They're declaring their independence. And so things that they want, okay, they want equal rights under the Constitution. They want equal opportunities for education, the right to own property, equality under the law, okay, equal enforcement of the law. And this one was not passed unanimously. Okay, they thought this might be kind of a bridge too far where they'd be mocked for this because men would see this as unrealistic, okay, or that there's be backlash to this. But some are going to push for the right to vote. Now, why Seneca Falls Convention matters is because it really organizes the women's rights movement moving forward. Okay, so you're going to see organized women's rights movements where they're like, oh, other women feel the same way. We are going to organize into collective groups. Okay, kind of this like fear of speaking out, the stigma has been broken now. Okay, now keep in mind, it's going to be about 70 plus years until women get the right to vote, but this is kind of a starting or jumping off point. Okay, so we're going to end it there for right now. Okay, have a wonderful day, AP historians.